Ah, Smart Water. Pure, crisp taste.
That's really good water.
It's the kind of water that says, I have my life together.
I do feel more sophisticated.
Smart Water. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
Anyone can follow. It takes something special to be an original. Which is why the 2025 Lincoln Navigator SUV arrives with new ways of surrounding you in luxury, including the ultra-wide 48-inch panoramic display and the multi-sensory Lincoln Rejuvenate experience. A true original never stops evolving. So meet the 2025 Navigator, the original that's all new and better than ever. Learn more at Lincoln.com. Lincoln and Navigator are trademarks of Ford or its affiliates.
Hey, welcome to another episode of The Eagle, a Times Union podcast. I'm Jessica Marshall. October 6th marked 7 years since the Schoharie limo crash that killed 20 people. One of the deadliest ground transportation disasters in New York history. Reporter Larry Rulison and I spent most of last year producing a limited series podcast on the crash. It's called Catastrophic Failure. This week on The Eagle, we're going to play you the first episode of that series. It was first published in July of 2024. As a warning to listeners, it does contain graphic descriptions of the events of that day, so please listen with care. Here's episode 1 of Catastrophic Failure.
At approximately 1:55 p.m., Schoharie County Sheriff's Office and New York State Police Patrols responded to a motor vehicle crash at the intersection of State Route 30 and State Route 30A in the town of Schoharie. In total, 20 victims were killed. All were adults.
It was one of the deadliest ground transportation disasters in U.S. history. The limousine crash that killed 20 people in upstate New York on October 6, 2018. I'm Jessica Marshall. In this podcast from the Times Union, reporter Larry Rulison and I are going to go back and look at the circumstances surrounding this devastating crash and attempt to unravel a very complicated story.
People looked at me and said, "How did they all die? Are you kidding me? Did you see that limo?"
Well, this was certainly one of the most egregious cases of what I'm going to call intentional disregard for human life.
It's a story of tragedy and loss, of negligence and consequence. But more than anything else, it's a story of catastrophic failure.
The thing should have never been on the road to begin with.
The owner of the limousine company was a former FBI informant.
We just want the truth to come out.
Episode 1, The Crash. There are going to be times in this podcast series when we're going to talk about topics or describe situations that may be triggering, disturbing, and inappropriate for younger listeners. We will warn you ahead of these moments, but please use your discretion and listen with care. Let's begin this story on October 6th, 2018. It's not the beginning of this story, but it's where we need to begin this podcast. For many people in this corner of the world, it's a day they remember clearly. Kind of like you remember exactly where you were and what you were doing on September 11th, 2001, if you were around back then. You remember because something indescribably awful happened. a tragedy of epic proportions. A disaster with an aftershock that will ripple across generations. October 6th, 2018, was a beautiful autumn day in upstate New York. It was a pleasant 68 degrees, partly sunny. The leafy and pastoral stretch of New York country was just starting to show the season's color. I'm going to start here with my memory of that day. I was in Schoharie County visiting a pumpkin farm. I left that farm around 2 p.m., and I took Country Route 30A back to the highway, where I was heading back to Albany. It's about as country a road as you'll find in this region. Quiet, winding, picturesque. And as I drove, I marveled at the blazing colors of upstate New York in the fall. If you ask me, it's one of the most beautiful places in the world at this time of year. As I approached the entrance to I-88, I saw flashing lights. I saw a lot of them. New York State Police had completely blocked the bridge that ran over the 4-lane highway. On the other side, the road leads into the small town of Schoharie. There were multiple police and emergency vehicles with lights flashing. Something was really wrong here. I wondered what was going on. I found out later that afternoon after I'd gotten home. I had been less than a mile down the road from the scene of one of the deadliest ground transportation disasters in U.S. history. For Jerry Bersesi and her husband Sam, October 6th, 2018 started out as a pretty normal Saturday.
So we were planning a big dinner Saturday. We always used to have dinners at our house.
Jerry and Sam are an active and gregarious pair. They finish each other's sentences, and they love to entertain at their home in the small town of Florida, New York. So when their oldest daughter said she was coming to town for a visit from Florida, the state, not to be confused with the town, she says they planned a big family dinner.
Sam called Savannah and said, hey, can you come to the house Saturday night for dinner? Me and Diego are going to be there. We'll have a good time.
They invited their youngest daughter, 24-year-old Savannah Bersesi, to join them as well. Savannah lived nearby with her boyfriend, 27-year-old Matthew Coons. But Savannah told her dad and stepmom she couldn't make it.
All we knew was that it was a birthday party and that she couldn't make it, so we were going to hook up with her probably on Sunday.
When your children reach a certain age, you stop asking all these detailed questions.
Yeah, she was living on her own.
She's 24 years old.
Right,
you don't need to tell me where you're going.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, you can't make it, you can't make it. So, yeah.
Mary and Kyle Ashton passed that Saturday in a similar way. They live in Winterport, Maine, where they moved 20 years ago to live their dream of running a bed and breakfast. They didn't know what their son, Michael Ukai, was up to that day. But October 6th was his birthday, his 34th birthday.
Kyle and I were in our parlor watching TV, just having a regular old Saturday. And I said, oh, geez, we should really call Michael for his birthday. So we called the home phone, left a message, and thought nothing of it.
Kevin Cushing spent that Saturday morning going through his garage in Saratoga Springs. He was looking for furniture for his 31-year-old son Patrick's new apartment. Patrick was moving in with his girlfriend, 26-year-old Amanda Halse. They were moving into an apartment in downtown Albany.
So we had a nice day. Talked to Pat, helped him get his house together, and went down into the garage and pulled some stuff together that we thought he might like.
In the afternoon, Kevin and his wife Sue headed out to have lunch with their older son. They texted Patrick along the way to tell them what they'd found in the garage. They promised to figure out the details of any furniture handoffs later.
I don't think he mentioned he was going on but he wouldn't. I mean, he does what he's going to do.
Janet Steenberg, on the other hand, knew exactly what two of her sons, 29-year-old Axel and 34-year-old Rich, were doing that day. Axel had planned a big birthday outing for his new wife, Amy. She was turning 30, and 17 of their family members and friends got into a white Ford Excursion stretch limousine at their house in Amsterdam, New York, around noon. Then they got on their way to Omegang Brewery, about 50 miles away in Cooperstown. They were going to do a beer tasting birthday party.
And then Axel and Amy invited us to go. But I was like, I don't want to take a seat from someone. I'm not really that much into the drinking, so I didn't want to take a seat to go party with everybody that when I'm not going to drink, so we didn't go.
What all 4 sets of these families did not know, along with more than a dozen other families, was that this October Saturday was going to upend their lives. It was the day their worst nightmares came true. Dan Bogan was driving to a family wedding in Schoharie that afternoon. He and his pregnant wife and young son pulled into the parking lot at the Apple Barrel Country Store off of Route 30A around 1:30 p.m. They'd been traveling in tandem with his wife's family from their home in Rensselaer County, which was about an hour away.
We parked, we went in, we ordered sandwiches.
The family agreed to stop there to stretch their legs and grab a bite to eat before they headed to their hotel in the town to get ready for the wedding. The Apple Barrel's main parking lot was pretty full at that time, which is a normal occurrence on a fall Saturday. So the family had to park their cars on the fringe of the property, on a grassy patch of land adjacent to a ravine in the woods that edged one side of the property.
Because my dog was in the back of our car and it was a hot day, we parked on the trees and had windows down. And I went out and I got him out of the car and he went into the ravine where all of this happened. And he's a lab, so he laid down in the water. I mean, it's just such a memorable part of the experience leading up to this life-changing incident.
I want to pause here for a second to explain the geography a little bit more, because the geography is so important in what happens next. The Apple Barrel Country Store and Restaurant is on Route 30A. The building is just a few yards southeast of a 3-way intersection between routes 30 and 30A. The edge of its parking lot, where Dan Bogan and his family parked their cars, lines up roughly with the intersection. Route 30A is a flat road. Route 30 is on a hill. And where the bottom of that hill meets that flat road is the intersection. This is where I'm going to bring in Times Union reporter Larry Rulison. You will hear a lot from him in this podcast. He's going to explain the geography a little bit more.
It's called the T intersection.
It's a one-way stop sign, right? The stop sign is just when you're coming kind of southwest down 30 and you hit 30A, you're going to stop for a stop sign, but there are no stop signs on 30A going in either direction.
Exactly.
So on the other side of 30A is just, kind of a grassy patch and a ravine, right? Can you kind of describe that?
When you come down to the intersection, the Apple Barrel is really off to your left a bit. So when you're looking straight ahead, what you see is sort of like parts of their parking lot. And then there's this ravine with like some fencing around it. and woods. So, I mean, you might not realize what's straight ahead, but it is a ditch.
Okay, let's go back to Dan Bogan now. On October 6th, 2018, he was in the parking lot of the Apple Barrel Country Store in Schoharie around 1:50 p.m. A few minutes later, his family came back to their cars, and they all started to pack up to leave. What happened next is something that Dan has never talked about publicly.
I've described it before as like, I just saw a meteor fall out of the sky and just blow up. It was this explosion of energy.
While Dan Bogan was standing on the edge of the Apple Barrel parking lot at 1:55 p.m. that day, Holly Wood and her 25-year-old daughter were in their car on Route 30. They'd just pulled up to the stop sign at the intersection between 30 and 30A, and they were waiting to turn left onto 30A. They'd just dropped off some pet food at a local animal shelter, and they were heading to a fall festival that was about 8 miles away. They wanted to make the most of the beautiful fall weather.
So we're going to make a couple hours out of the day just because it was a nice day and everything. And as soon as we hit Route 7 and 30, it changed the whole outcome.
It has taken Holly Wood more than 5 years to speak publicly about what happened next. But first, we need to rewind a few minutes. Holly and her daughter were driving south along Route 30. Bear with us as we describe this traffic route, as it can get kind of complicated if you're not looking at a map. They stopped at a traffic light at the intersection of Route 7 and Route 30. That's about 2 miles northeast of the Apple Barrel. As they were waiting at a stoplight, a white Ford Excursion limousine coming west on Route 7 took a right onto Route 30 in front of them. It was traveling slowly. And when the light turned, Holly found herself directly behind it.
They were going really slow and they were toward the side of the road. They weren't like driving in the actual driving lane. They were more pulled off toward the side of the road, driving really slow.
Holly says she also noticed at this time that the limo's reverse lights were on, as if they were backing up, but they were still traveling forward.
I asked my daughter, I said, do you hear that noise? And my window was open a little ways. And I was like, it sounds like a backup alarm. And so I was like, I have no idea what is going on. And they were driving really slow still. So we're like, are they sightseeing? And we didn't know really what was going on.
About 230 yards down the road, they came to the bridge over Interstate 88. Holly says the limo moved over to the shoulder just before crossing the bridge.
There were 2 cars coming up the hill, so I couldn't go around. So I waited, I just stopped, and then he pulled back out and headed across the I-88 bridge, and they were going really slow, and so I was like, okay, now what's going on? Because they're not even picking up speed. This is ridiculous. And so once they got over the bridge, he pulled over again over the white line and didn't come to a complete stop. He just kept rolling forward a little bit. So when the 2 cars passed, I passed around them.
If circumstances that day had been different, Holly Wood and her daughter may have gone to that fall festival. They may have had a lovely afternoon, and they may never have thought of that odd limo that they passed ever again. If things had gone another way entirely, they might not have been alive to talk to us for this podcast. But neither of those scenarios played out in reality. Instead, Holly says, the specter of that white limo has haunted her daily for more than 5 years. And it probably will for the rest of her life. After Holly passed the limo, she says she continued on Route 30. A few minutes later, she drove down the hill, stopped at the stop sign, and turned on her blinker in preparation for turning left onto 30A.
When we got to the bottom of the hill, we were sitting there talking. My daughter's on her cell phone looking down. And then all of a sudden we just heard this god awful noise coming behind us that, I mean, to me, it sounded like a jet engine. It really did. It was such a loud whirling noise coming up behind me. I looked in the rear view mirror and I could see the limo coming up behind me in the rear view mirror. And I just, I yelled at my daughter to hold on, not like it's going to make any difference, but just as she looked up and looked over at me, the limo just like flew past the driver's side door. It was going so fast that it was just like a white blur going right past the window.
We'll be right back.
If you're enjoying this podcast, take advantage of all the Times Union has to offer and support our efforts to bring you award-winning journalism by becoming a Times Union subscriber today. Go to timesunion.com/subscribe.
This is Catastrophic Failure, a Times Union podcast. Let's go back to Dan Bogan's perspective. The white limousine that had just missed Hollywood, the one blasting down the hill on Route 30, it was headed straight toward the grassy area where Dan's family was parked. Dan and his wife had decided to leave, so they were already in their car, waiting to turn right out of the parking lot. Dan's sister-in-law Jackie was still there, though, standing next to her Toyota Highlander. She was chatting with her father, 71-year-old James Schnurr, and her husband, 46-year-old Brian Huff. They were standing in front of her car.
I was looking up the hill from where the limousine came around the bend. I saw how it moved. My initial thought was, look at this guy or look at this jerk. But it was so fast that it's amazing how fast our brains can work. I did the math. At 100 miles an hour, it was in sight for 4.5 seconds. I watched the line of travel. It slid right past me. There was a moment where I couldn't even move. I kicked myself for years because I couldn't even honk. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't respond to just say, get out of the way. It was too fast. It really was. And to watch that travel past, blast Jackie's car, do all that it did, and then all of that was gone. The vegetation, the trees, everything, all of that was just smashed and knocked down and cleared out. And then there's Jackie. I'm like, how the hell did that happen?
At 1:55 p.m. on Saturday, October 6th, 2018, a white Ford Excursion stretch limousine carrying 17 people and the driver on their way to Omegang Brewery in Cooperstown sped southwest down the hill on Schoharie County Route 30. It would later be determined that it was going upwards of 100 miles per hour as it blew through the intersection of Routes 30 and 30A. It collided with Jackie Schnurr's Toyota Highlander, parked in the grass by the ravine next to the apple barrel. Then, it crashed head-on into the ravine. This is one of those moments in this podcast where we want to pause for a content warning. The descriptions we're about to go into about what happened after the limo crashed may be extremely disturbing. If you prefer not to listen, please feel free to skip this part.
In the moment, I saw how everything was obliterated, and the only thing that was remaining was Jackie was on the ground. The vehicles were gone. My father-in-law, my brother-in-law were gone, and I couldn't fathom what the hell had just happened. And so I saw my brother-in-law propelled through the air above some of the shorter trees and just not just propelled outward, but he flew through the air.
Across the street, Holly Wood and her daughter had another perspective.
The impact, the way the limo hit the ravine and the back end came up to like a 45-degree angle and then slammed back down, I knew that anybody that was in that back had to have been thrown toward the front of the car.
Sure.
That was just, the impact was so awful. Like it was such a hard impact that if anybody survived, it would have been a miracle.
Holly says she pulled over in shock.
I mean, I froze. I didn't even really know how to react at first. I was like, where do I go? What do I do? You know, so my daughter's like, just pull over here. So we parked my car around the corner of the stop sign. And then she ran over to the parking lot and I yelled at her to call 911. And she was on the phone with 911 trying to explain to them where we were. And the dispatch was just asking her like question after question. And so she handed me the phone because she said he didn't know where I was explaining. So then I got on the phone, on her phone, and started explaining as to where we were and telling them that there were definitely multiple fatalities. They need to get several emergency vehicles there. And then I ran to the two pedestrians and she ran over to see if she could help at the limo.
Holly says the 911 operator asked her to look for survivors. She found two pedestrians who were hit.
I had gone to where the older gentleman was, and he was like intertwined in the branches and the little sapling trees that were there, and everybody was saying that he was still breathing, and I was trying to explain to the 911 operator that he was, and he was like, well, you have to do CPR. And I was like, I can't even get to him. And then I had also gone over to the gentleman, the younger gentleman, the pedestrian that got hit, that was in between the two cars. And what I saw from that was, I think that's forever embedded in my head. It will never, it's a picture that will never be erased. And because he was asking about that, and I was like, I said, there's nothing you can do. There was nothing I could do for that gentleman. The older gentleman, I pretty much am sure that he took his last breath when we came up to, like, when I got up to where he was. But the one in between the two cars was just, he was mangled. There was nothing you could do for that gentleman.
Emergency responders arrived on the scene within minutes. They approached the limo in the ravine to attempt to rescue survivors. A few of the first responders spoke to the AP later that day in footage that ran on broadcasts across the country.
They grabbed the jaws. I fired the jaws up. They went down there. Within 2 minutes, they had that car open. We were pulling bodies out. They were still alive. And we kept going.
Holly Wood and Dan Bogan were there when the first responders arrived. Holly and her daughter stayed with the two pedestrians above the ravine, and Dan ran down into the ravine to try to help with the limo.
The things that I saw, it was pretty graphic. My wife approached the vehicle, the limo, and she saw inside the carnage. And I saw too, but I didn't go quite up to the limo because every time I started to run out to go help, I had the most instinctual feeling I've ever had in my life. That anytime I started to move away from my car, I ran back to be right with my son. He was strapped in. He's strapped in, and he's 3 years old. He's strapped into a car seat. We're close to the intersection. There were other cars that were starting to maybe rubberneck or whatever, but there's so much commotion and chaos that they slammed the brakes. You know, there was almost were secondary accidents. There was no additional collisions. And with all that chaos, I just could not go anywhere else.
We tried to speak to first responders from that day, but no one would speak to us for this podcast. Many of them are no longer in emergency services. Again, here is that first responder who spoke to the AP the afternoon of the crash.
This is not what we're trained to deal with, is the aftermath. The things we saw was like a nightmare.
medical examiners would later determine that 20 people had died from blunt force trauma related to the crash. That was all 17 friends and family members inside the limousine, the driver, and the 2 bystanders. It would take days before the names of all of the victims were released to the public. But Dan Bogan and his family knew the identities of the 2 bystanders immediately: his father-in-law, James Schnurr, and his brother-in-law, Brian Huff. Late that Saturday night, Mary Ashton was watching TV when she got a phone call from her son, Jeremy. She says Jeremy sounded really anxious on the phone. He asked to speak to his dad, Kyle. She says she handed the phone to Kyle and strained to overhear their conversation.
Kyle gets on the phone. Hey, Jerry, how's it going? Next thing I know, Kyle gets up and he walks into the living room, leaves the room. And just something inside of me, I'm like, wow, something's not right. Something's going on. I said, Lord, prepare me, because something's not right.
Sam and Jerry Bersesi went to sleep that Saturday night, not knowing anything about a crash. But Jerry woke up to a disturbing phone call early Sunday morning.
We were still waking up and my phone rings at 7:30 Sunday morning. And it's my girlfriend, Debbie, my longest friend from grade school. And she says she's acting weird on the phone. And, I told her she just woke us up. And I'm sorry. And she goes, have you talked with Savannah today? I don't know why she was asking me that. And I said, no, why? And she said, well, it's probably just a rumor. She said, but that accident last night? And I said, no, what do you mean? She said, well, there was an accident last night, she said, and I got a call from a coworker that thinks that maybe Savannah and Matt were in the car.
Kevin Cushing was in bed late Saturday night when his doorbell rang.
We were actually in bed, not asleep, but we said, who's ringing our doorbell at this hour? And got to the system and I pressed the button and I looked and there's 2 people walking away. I don't know what that's all about, so went downstairs and opened the door. I said, can I help you? And it was state police.
I found out about the accident at a little after 5, and it was at 12. 12 people.
Janet Steenberg was the first family to know for certain that 2 of her children were killed in the crash. Dan Bogan says the images of that day flash in his mind daily. On top of that, he's haunted by the crushing weight of self-imposed guilt.
I observed everything. And I, a number of times through the years, wanted to reach out to some of those families and just let them know. But I couldn't. It was just too difficult. And I actually had some fear that somehow I would be judged or that they would be angry at me. And that might not be rational either, but I felt horrendous, terrible that I saw what happened to their loved ones, to their family members, and I just couldn't necessarily say that out loud.
If the limo driver had not swerved around her car at the intersection, Holly Wood says she's certain she would not be alive today.
He saved our lives. If he did not swerve when he did, there would be nothing left to us.
Holly still lives in Schoharie County. She says she has to drive by the site of the crash every day on her way to work. But she says she always takes the longer route. She says she will never drive on the hill on Route 30 ever again.
I have not gone down that road since. I cannot. My son started to when I was going somewhere with him, and I literally started to have a panic attack because I can't bring myself to go down that. there was like going down that hill, and all the years of us living out here, I always took that way because it's a little shortcut, and just now I would rather drive the extra mile and a half around than to go down that hill knowing what can happen. My daughter says I'm a crazy driver now because I'm so overly protective and I panic. Like, people come flying up behind me, you start to get the shakes. It's something that you just don't trust other drivers anymore. I have to drive past there every day to work, so I have to deal with it, and I have to learn to deal with it. But if something like that tragically can happen, you just never know.
Emergency crews still cleaning up a horrific accident in upstate New York.
In a matter of moments, a 30th birthday party turned to tragedy.
Reports of a multi-vehicle motor vehicle accident.
News of the crash spread quickly. By the following day, it was being covered on national network news shows. The family members of victims started appearing in interviews.
Earlier this morning, I spoke with Karina Hulse, whose sister Amanda was killed in the crash, and with Karina, her boyfriend Ian Griffin. I asked Karina what she was being told by authorities.
We were told that the limousine was going down the hill over 60 miles an hour, missed the stop sign, and then hit another car, which hit 2 more pedestrians and killing 20 altogether.
Local law enforcement, New York State Police, and the National Transportation Safety Board began investigations.
Governor Cuomo has directed all state agencies to provide every resource necessary to aid in the investigation and determination of what led to this tragedy.
But the full story of what caused the crash was yet to be uncovered. And when it finally came to light, it was far more complicated and catastrophic than anyone could imagine.
We were able to publish a story that said that this limousine had failed 2 inspections prior to the crash.
That's next time on Catastrophic Failure. You can listen to more episodes of Catastrophic Failure on timesunion.com or on the Times Union app or wherever else you get your podcasts. That's it for this week. We'll be back soon with more from inside the newsroom. The Eagle is a production of the Times Union. It's produced and edited by myself, Jessica Marshall, with help from Erica Smith and the Times Union digital team. Our music is Flyin' by Top Floor. Special thanks to Larry Rulison for his contribution to this episode. Got questions or comments about the Eagle or any of our podcasts here at the Times Union? Email us at podcast@timesunion.com.